let's talk about what tends to hold that back, what keeps people from moving ahead, whether it's in a place as free as the U.S. or a place as rigid as Pakistan or China or other countries. The people who don't want to change tend to say, well, this is disruptive. And it's the same as going into an accounting department and saying, well, I have some processes that I just don't have the resources to deal with if you disrupt it. I only have the resources to deal with the process that I have today. And so that tends to be the counterweight or the response to, hey, let's break this, let's change it, let's do something new and interesting, because there's always a transition. And so the question with innovation is, how much disruption can we tolerate as a small social group of friends or a large society or a whole country? How much disruption can we tolerate and still be productive? And of course, you can't go all the way to one end of the spectrum or the other. You can't be totally inflexible and never change, because then you just get run over and eventually die out as a culture or society. Or on the other end, if you're totally flexible all the time, you never end up establishing predictable processes that other people can follow. So then you end up somewhere in the middle of how do you make this work? Because it's really change is really a social concept. And I'll give you an example in project management, which is where I'm at. That's my one of my skill areas and how I earn my living. There has been for, I would say, a good 15, 20 years, discussion about what's the best project management methodology for various types of projects. And there's discussion about agile projects versus projects that are planned entirely at the beginning and then executed. Those are the traditional projects, and those, it is accepted now, tend to be much more expensive. Why? Because you try to anticipate everything that happens up front and then execute it. Now, this is true. You have to do this with buildings and construction and certain types of things that can't be changed anyway. But with some things that can be changed, that traditional, we call it waterfall type project management methodology tends to be more expensive. And so increasingly software projects are implemented with some sort of agile project methodology, which basically, if you really take it out of the project management context, it's a way to respond to changes and new information. It's a way to go through the learning curve and continue to implement in the general direction that you wanted to go, and yet keep everybody together. And I think we're doing that as a society too, is answering that question. How can I be more responsive? How can I answer problems and questions that I didn't anticipate and still keep the group together and still give the group some consistency? And that's the pursuit of agile project management, is to keep the project team together even though we're not 100% sure how we're going to answer these challenges. And I think that's what you're referring to as a society, is the societies who learn to do that well are going to be the ones that are the most innovative.
So that's the thing, is on a societal level, we're a much larger corporation, so to speak. And we've got a lot of very ironclad perceptions, doctrines, and dogmas that tend to govern us. This jobs versus work dichotomy is just one example, because words like the word job are political platform words. Candidates get elected on the basis of promising jobs. Once you do that, we're dealing with a lot more conservatism, a lot more reticence to move, because it threatens the underlying structures. But I wonder, we look at corporations, and corporations traditionally are fairly, the larger they are, the more conservative they are. They move more slowly. We were talking about that at the beginning of the call, that you and I can reach out and grab a tool called Uvu when a half an hour ago we were ready to use Skype to record our call to accomplish the same thing. 30 minutes, no committee meeting, we didn't vote, we acted, right? And we could reach out and grab another tool, in an instant if we needed to. Large corporations don't move that quickly, and in fact, there's some fear there. But what what I think is that what this economic change is demanding of corporations and asking us for is not necessarily that we change more dramatically or more radically than we ever have. If you look at the changes over the last 50 years, large corporations have changed radically and dramatically. If you look at just the change between corporations 50 years ago being primarily paper-based and now using Twitter and Facebook to do marketing and interacting with, managing their brand socially. That's an enormous change with lots and lots of stages to go through, where maybe 80% of the workforce has to be computer literate versus 50 years ago, you might have 5 guys that were computer literate in a corporation of size. It's an enormous change. What I think that the current economic climate is asking us for, first off, I think it's more than an economic climate. I think we use terms like market. We have to start, it's a nebulous word that doesn't mean a lot. It means society. I think what society and the world are asking us for and what the shift in the economy / society / culture is asking us for is that we change more rapidly. Not more dramatically. We've been changing dramatically. But that we have to do it quicker. That large corporations have to be more responsive, more agile, as you put it, and basically make these changes at a more rapid pace in order to stay competitive and in order to innovate in conjunction with the rate at which society is demanding new tools and new solutions. 50 years ago, the difference between 50 years ago and 48 years ago in demanding a tool to accomplish a given task in our personal lives, it wasn't the difference between a fax machine and email. It was the difference between, a ballpoint pen and a roller pen, okay? But now, the difference between 1 or 2 years is whether or not we even use a pen, whether or not we're even using a piece of paper and mailing that, whether or not we even use email and instead maybe do a video conference. That's a huge change of pace, more than it even is a change in radical concepts.
Well, let's take that social concept and bring it down to free agent source, because you're talking about how companies respond to change, and you're making the case that they're going to need to change. But let's talk about the practical part of how they actually change. Think about any of the major large employers in the U.S., and let's say they're faced with some sort of game-changing issue in their industry. And so if you employ 50,000 people, that's a lot of people to change the mindset. So let's suppose you go through some sort of either manufacturing transformation, you decide to change the way you distribute your product, you decide to massively change your internal service process. Whatever that is, you've got a roster of 50,000 people that some will need to be retrained, some just need to change the thinking. And this is the basis for free agent source. The ethos of free agent source assumes and believes that companies can't do business that way, that the demands of change, exactly the case you were making, will say, I can no longer afford to have 50,000 permanently employed employees on my roster. It just doesn't work. Now, it doesn't mean that we're throwing away half their workforce. What it means is people get redeployed to tasks where they're most proficient. Let's take me as an example. If I'm a permanent employee in that company, maybe at one point I'm working in accounting, but suddenly processes change in accounting. It no longer takes as many people to do, or maybe I'm in marketing and we're marketing one way this year, but suddenly we want to rethink the way we do marketing. And now, well, Steve, you don't exactly have either the personality or the skill set that really fits what we want to do. So here comes the hard feelings, and gee, can we redeploy Steve? And if you multiply that times 25,000 people, half the workforce of this theoretical 50,000 person company, that's a lot of friction, and that takes a lot of time to adjust. Where if you look at it in the context of the way I'm working today, I'm working on a client project. I'm hired to do a specific deliverable, and when that's done, they say, thanks very much, Steve, goodbye. and I am now redeployed not within that company, but somewhere else in the economy where my skills are useful. Where if I had stayed on in my client company, my skills may not be as useful anymore once that project is done. And it's good for both parties to kind of recognize that. So I think what you're saying is the case for much smaller ratios of permanently employed, a permanent workforce in companies. And that's why free agent source is important to me, and I think it's going to be important to a lot of people, because it gives us the tools we need and still handles the fact that in the U.S., we're going to have a much more dynamic workforce. You're not going to be on this permanent roster, but you're going to be focusing on your trade skill or your area of expertise, kind of going from need to need, company to company.
Surely you don't really mean that I might have to change directions after 40. 40 is the new 20. And the truth is, there's nothing worse, right, than being laid off at 40 or unemployed at 50 in the old days. But now I think that's the new norm, that we're no longer going to think of that as unemployment. The normal dichotomy, the binary polarized dichotomy between employment and unemployment is part of what's going away. What we're going to start saying, instead of you and I shaking hands at parties, where do you work, by which I mean where are you employed, and you ask me the same question, we might say, or are you employed? We might instead say, are you engaged currently, and where are you currently involved? Where is your current relationship? And in fact, we may get rid of the whole polarized it's me and one company thing, and which companies are you currently working with, Steve? What places and in what endeavors are you currently engaged? What irons do you have in the fire? Because my answer might be, well, I run a small business where I do some graphic design, and I also have a corporate contract to do some internet marketing with a Fortune 500 company. I'm also starting up a new little trial startup that sells antiques on eBay. And that's going to be respectable now. That's the new thing. In the old days, it was easy. You get out of school, you get your job, you stay there till you retire, and then you die. And I think those days are being replaced by something that's much more capable of responding quickly and commensurately with the changes in technology and technological demand. It's no coincidence that the rate of development of tools in our culture in places like the cloud are matching pace and perhaps even demanding a change in the way in which we work. And I think also, as I keep arguing, changing potentially our relationship with politics and our political structure. I think we're going to be more responsive there. And this whole throw the bums out attitude that we're starting to see a groundswell of is partly driven by the fact, well, if I'm this agile and I'm this equipped to take care of myself, what do I need these guys for? They have to sell me something useful.